So I've asked a friend of mine, somebody that I have known for many years, and who happens to be chairman of the board of the Florida Association of Managing Entities. Her name is Linda McKinnon, and she runs the South Florida Behavioral Health Network. No, not South Florida.
Central Florida.
Central Florida Behavioral Health Network, which was the first one to be created in the state of Florida. And she happens to be a longtime friend of our luncheon speaker, Mark Engelhardt, and she's promised to share us some unscripted stories, that something other than what you see up here on the bio. So please, let's welcome Linda McKinnon. And let me just say one other thing. We are going to have probably some time for questions, so there's pad and pen on each of your tables. So if you would like to ask a question, if you'll just hold your piece of paper up, me or somebody or me will come by and pick it up, and we'll bring it up here, and we'll then be screening the questions and asking them. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to have the opportunity to introduce Mark Engelhardt. Mark is, as Barney said, a longtime friend of mine, and he is an associate professor, is that correct? Close enough, at the University of South Florida, Florida Mental Health Institute. And he has done so much over the many years for our communities, both in Florida. I had the opportunity of following him after he had worked for the Department of Children and Families as the local mental health and substance abuse expert, and was very lucky to have his assistance as we transitioned, because I had no idea at that time what everybody was responsible for. He spends a lot of time doing training and technical assistance throughout the state and nationally on housing, acute care initiatives, and most recently has been doing a lot of work with sequential intercept mapping. And I know that we are going to be having the opportunity to work with him to do that as we look at the systems of care in Pinellas County for the executive order. And with that, Barney wanted me to tell some kind of story. I think probably the only story that I have that is tellable is that both of us continue to struggle to get our children through college. And we'll be working until that happens.
Thanks. Okay, there we go. Good. Good afternoon. I was lucky to be up here last year on a panel, and we talked about the criminal justice, mental health, substance abuse reinvestment grants last year, and I'm going to reference them a couple of times in this presentation today because they're so important to Florida. If you may recall, they came into existence in 2007. The legislation started in August of 2006, was approved in 2007, and the money was rolling in 2007, which is incredible, okay? Barney also called me the other day and said, hey, listen, the governor was invited to do this luncheon, and Mike Carroll was invited to do this luncheon. So I'm it, okay? So I'm sorry they're not here. The good news, the reason I mention that is both the governor's budget and DCF budget includes an increase in the criminal justice, mental health, substance abuse reinvestment grant acts from $3 million a year to $9 million a year. So we'll see how that plays out. But in any event, in the early legislation, our Technical Assistance Center was established at the University of South Florida at the Florida Mental Health Institute. And, you want to give credit where it's credit due. John Petrilla at that time, John and I were co-directors. And John had the vision to talk to the Gaines Center early on about sequential intercept mapping, which I'll talk about today. It seems to be the hottest topic in almost every county these days. I'm totally booked out for the spring. We're trying to squeeze days in, and we'll go through it. But anyhow, back then, actually, the sequential intercept mapping was just starting nationally. Around 2006. And we were trained by the Gaines Center. There's 7 of us in Florida that have been trained. And to date, we have done 18 sequential intercept mappings in Florida. That's almost as many as Ohio and Pennsylvania. And I want to give you this backdrop. On October 1st, we were invited to go up to Akron. We met with 6 other states that have centers of excellence for criminal justice, mental health, and substance abuse. Massachusetts, New York, Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. In all of those states, we sat down and we compared notes, what we were doing in the area of training, technical assistance, and evaluation. We picked about 5 items. The number 1 item of all of those states is sequential intercept mapping. It is the process we go through with communities to set priorities. So I'll go through what the model is. I'll give some live examples. And as Linda mentioned, we're going to be doing a little bit of this work on the executive order. In particular, Pinellas County will be the first one up. So, the problem. And actually, let me talk about the participants first before we talk about the problem. Before we do any of this mapping, a list of participants goes out to counties. And it can be in multiple counties if it's a rural area. The preparation for doing a mapping is critical. You can't do one in a month. Hey, Mark, come on out and do it in a month. I told Pinellas County, I said, we're going to need 2.5 months lead. And the reason is the folks at the table are judges, state's attorneys, public defenders, CEOs, middle managers, people in recovery, formerly homeless, et cetera. They're at the table, maybe about 25 people. So you really have to organize the participants before you even pick your date and who's coming to the table. The big thing is the judges, clearing a judge's docket for a day and a half. These used to be 2-day events. We've kind of cramped it down to a day and a half. To clear their docket, to make sure they're there. Just one quick example, we did one in Hillsborough County. This past year, there were 6 judges there who stayed for the entire day and a half. It was very impressive. So, by the way, I really enjoyed the presentation by DOC earlier. The alternative sanctions is very much a part of this. It was a very nice presentation. We should go statewide with that. So let's talk about the problem. And you guys know this. And the other thing I'll just mention, I know there's experts in this room. I mean, we got state's attorneys, we got sheriffs. We have a lot of folks in this room who are experts. So I'm kind of singing to the choir here. But each one of you is an expert in a little different area. So here's the problem. And you know it. Many of the same people are served in multiple systems: mental health, substance abuse, criminal justice, and other social services. These are very expensive individuals who require intensive services. Now, when we really talk about mental health, we're talking about serious mental illness. If we looked at everybody who has a mental health problem in your jail, we're going to be looking at maybe 50% or so at some level. Substance abuse, 80%. But we're really talking about that group of people who have either schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or serious depression, coupled with substance abuse. In that group alone, it's estimated there's about 80% of that group has a co-occurring mental health and substance use disorder. So it is a discrete group. Very high users of the system. So that's the problem. We're looking at a very discrete group. So let's see if this works. It does. So the basis for sequential intercept mapping, it's a tool. It's an educational tool. It's an implementation tool. It's a planning tool. This is not traditional strategic planning, but it's pretty darn close to it. The difference is the facilitators like myself know something a little bit about the system. We know the funding. This isn't come to a meeting and stick a bunch of stickies on the wall. This is a real conversation. So the tool itself helps transform fragmented systems. I don't think there's a county in Florida will say we have the perfect system. As a matter of fact, I'm always suspect when I hear the word system of care. I know systems of care, and basically the way we look at it, if it's not organized, it's not a system. That's kind of the litmus test. So we identify local resources, gaps in the system, and we help to identify where the interventions begin. So cross-system mapping, it's an activity which depicts the flow of the criminal justice system. The interesting thing about this model is actually, its foundation is actually in the criminal justice system with the substance abuse and mental health overlay. So it was really started in the criminal justice system. See if I can. So let me just mention the authors. The authors are Patty Griffin and Mark Muntz. As I say, I met with them in October. We were trained by then. Some of you may remember Patty. Patty was the head of Florida's forensic system many, many years ago, and then moved up to Pennsylvania. So one of the things that distinguishes sequential intercept mapping from other types of strategic planning is people move through the criminal justice system in very predictable ways. It's a linear model. We sort of know how they go through the system, and I'll walk you through the system even though you're experts. But what we also know is the mental health system and the substance abuse system is not a linear system at all. So if we looked at the civil system, somebody who's got mental health problems and substance abuse problems, they're not going through a nice, neat legal system. They're going through a system of recovery and relapse. So how do you couple a linear system with a nonlinear treatment model? And that's part of our challenge. So what we're going to illustrate today are the key points to intercept people. So we have prompt access to treatment. We have opportunities for diversion. Not diversion for all. Some people belong in jail. The timely movement through the criminal justice system. A lot of that has to do with processes, how people go through arraignment and they go through their sentencing or whatever. And then, of course, linkage to community services. And being in Florida, we all know the funding issue in Florida. We're very, very dependent on our own general revenue and the federal block grant. That's why the reinvestment grants have been a real boon to our communities. They've been a catalyst for change because they finally added in some money to these communities. By the way, I'll give you a feeling for what a typical grant looks like. A typical grant in the reinvestment grants is about $400,000 a year for 3 years with a 100% match. And that match comes from the county. When this legislative approval came through, one of the selling points was that the counties were willing to match it at 100%. That's a lot. And that could be anything from staff time to services from providers to CIT officers, et cetera. So what's the mapping? You know, a lot of people have picked up on the SIM. I still call it mapping, okay? Because that's essentially what we're doing is we're mapping the process. One of the tasks is to nurture a cross-systems collaboration. That's why the participants that are invited are cross-systems. When you get a state's attorney and a public defender and a judge and providers in the same room, we're talking about several different systems and different languages. Collaboration has a purpose. Unlike a lot of other strategic planning, we're on a mission. We're going to leave in a day and a half, and there's going to be action items coming out of that day and a half. This isn't just another plan that sits on the shelf. So what we do is we map the local system. I'll show you an example of a map in a few minutes. As I said, we've got 18 of these in Florida. And there's a few others, by the way. I think the Gaines Center has been in Florida. This is the National Gaines Center. I know they recently did Miami-Dade. Duval was done by the Gaines Center. And many, many moons ago, they did one in Hillsborough. Our relationship with the Gaines Center, just so you know, is that we subcontract with Dr. Hank Stedman, the head of the Gaines Center. He's one of our consultants. Also, Dr. Fred Osher from the Council of State Governments is one of our subcontractors. So I will tell you, anytime the Gaines Center does come to Florida, we communicate. We ask them where they're going, and the next time they come, we may do a joint mapping. So I know there's a couple counties now who have applied for a free mapping out of the Gaines Center. I don't know if you'll win or not, but at least we're going to be talking. We're definitely coordinating. So what we do is we build an action plan. It's very detailed. Follow-up is an absolute key, and I'll come back to that. After the mapping, of course, there's implementation and evaluation. Evaluation has not always been the strongest point because there's not a whole lot of money in the local counties to do the evaluation. We've done some of it from a statewide basis, but more and more we need the evaluation. Right now, we're writing a legislative report, hopefully to be done tomorrow. I'm looking at the 9 counties that are doing the reinvestment grants, and we need data. We have to have that data. So we have to have cost data, we've got to have service data, et cetera. So I'll come back to that. So very simple, and this is the hard part. This is the job of the facilitator, because you've got a lot of high-level people in these meetings, is to keep people on task. This is focus. These meetings are strictly focus, and keeping them focused on the target population. That's one of the challenges, because we can drift. We can talk about all the people with substance abuse in the jails. We can talk about all the people who are homeless in the system, but we've got to stay focused on who's got a mental health issue in the system, who might be homeless and also has a substance use disorder. Okay? And by the way, the latest thing is when we start to look at these folks, what we also realize with this high-risk population, we have a number of people with complex healthcare disorders. We have hypertension, diabetes, obesity, etc. All those other factors that go into heart attacks. So now we're starting to add on the healthcare system to the mapping. So once again, I already mentioned the focus involved in the criminal justice system. And by the way, involved means anything from, it could be an arrest for trespassing. It could, in most cases, it's misdemeanors. We know we can divert misdemeanors a heck of a lot easier than felons. But some jurisdictions have created courts for felons. The other booming area has been in the whole area of veterans, the veterans courts that have been developing. Plus, the VA has discovered sequential intercept mapping. We told them about it 5-6 years ago as part of the National Center on Homeless Veterans. They've discovered it. They're starting to use it. And we actually did a veterans mapping in Pinellas County a couple of years ago. So, what are the overall goals? Well, this is kind of interesting. Your first goal is to promote recovery. Well, that's an interesting concept. Is the criminal justice system ready to talk about recovery? Because that's the bottom line, because after they leave the criminal justice, they're going to go home. And we all know that. And our mantra, quite frankly, is people recover at home. They don't recover in jail. They don't recover in CSUs. They don't recover in detox. They get good help, and it's a good beginning, but they recover at home. So that's just a theme I want to keep with you all day. And obviously, the balance of providing public safety and the quality of life for everybody in the community, including victims, including neighbors. So the goal of sequential intercept mapping is to keep people out of jail appropriately, and keep people primarily, once again, a lot of misdemeanors. And in jail, as you'll see, we go through the map, is to provide constitutionally adequate treatment in jail. Because as you know, when people are in jail, they actually have a constitutional right to treatment. They don't in the community, but they do in jail. So they have to get health care. They got to get some level of mental health care. They got to get some medications, et cetera. And then what's really, of course, appropriate is the link to comprehensive, appropriate, and integrated community-based services. And I use that word integrated these days because if we're not a co-occurring capable system, we're missing the boat on this group of people. It has to be co-occurring mental health, substance abuse capable. So, and there's been a lot of good work in Florida, a lot in this area. So, as we look at kind of designing the goals, and these are lofty goals. These are not easy for any county. It's accessible. So are there waiting lists? It's one of the questions we'll ask during the mapping. Are they comprehensive? What does comprehensive really mean? Does it mean outpatient, inpatient, residential treatment? So we'll let the local county sort of define their own level of comprehensiveness. Trauma-informed. Right now, I think we're fortunate that trauma-informed has really been pushed out nationally. What we already know, and we've known this for many, many years, is at least 90% of the women in jail have some level of trauma, and now as high as 80% for the men in this group. And a lot of these men with serious mental illnesses, when they're on the streets, they're actually victims in many, many cases. How many homeless men die a year? An awful lot. And they're not always perpetrators, many times they're victims. And they're winding up jail for the wrong reasons because they don't have housing. So I mentioned integrated. What are the options in the networked? I am looking to the managing entities, quite frankly, how managing entities are networking some of these services. So what are the challenges? What do we sort of know going in to any county, any sequential intercept mapping? Here's what we know. We know there's funding silos in Florida, in other states. We already know that. Just the way we're set up. We have Medicaid over here. We have general revenue over here, DOC over here, JJ over there. Everybody's in a funding silo. It's starting to come together. People are talking. In each county, you've got a limited history or true collaboration in that county. Every county is different. So you can kind of tell the newest saying these days is coordination, collaboration, and integration. And in the area of healthcare, we actually have different tools that help us with that. So we can now bring a tool into a county and do an analysis of the level of those three levels, whether it's coordinated, collaborative, or integrated. You know, John Cherry's sitting here. John has his second round of primary behavioral healthcare integration grants and is doing a wonderful job on the healthcare side. So the other thing we know is there's limited resources that create a very competitive environment. It depends on what county you're in. Depends on the providers, if they're competitive or they're cooperative. The good news is sequential intercept mapping actually brings people together. They're there for a common cause, and they're going to look at resources just a little bit differently. The other thing we know clearly is there are system cultures. You have criminal justice system, you have a mental health system, you got substance abuse, and you have a system where you have state's attorneys in the same room as public defenders. Some of them get along very, very well. Some don't get along quite that well. The good news is we also have a law enforcement system that has totally embraced CIT in this state. We're almost there. It's been enormous. Crisis intervention training in teams has grown. I'll just give you a quick statistic. In the last year and a half, under the criminal justice, mental health, substance reinvestment grants, 1,400 law enforcement officers or dispatchers or other related personnel have been trained in CIT, just through those grants. 1,400. 3 of those counties have now done mental health first aid for the general public. I think we got 450 people out there in the general public that are now looking at identifying people who might have a mental health or substance use problem, which is really going to help our school systems, by the way. See if we can identify some of these kids. So obviously there's local relationship building, different in every county, and then the target population. Our job is to be very focused on this group. So what are the benefits? I don't even think we have to sell this anymore. The jury's sort of out there. It's service retention for consumers and service users, stability in the community, that they're not going back to jail as often. What we have found is people are going back to jail, but not as much. So someone who was arrested 6 times last year in Charlotte County may only get arrested once. We did an evaluation down there. Public safety has been relatively evident through this mapping process, and cost savings. Here's the skinny on cost savings. I'm just going to say it out front because we have to be transparent about it. What we have in the system is we have a lot of we have cost avoidance. Okay, we have a lot of cost avoidance. What we don't have is it's hard to prove the cost savings simply because the jails have a fixed budget. The OC has a fixed budget. So that's the challenge, is to show the cost savings, unless you can shut down an entire pot like they did in Miami-Dade. That was cost savings. If you listen to Judge Leifman, of course, he attributes a lot of that cost savings to CIT. So, keys to success: planning councils and task forces, long-term. These aren't task forces that come and go. The nice thing about the reinvestment grants is they basically mandate it. You better have a planning council. They better meet regularly, et cetera. Consumer and family involvement, including people in recovery and including people who used to be homeless. They'll tell you how the system works. We think we know how it works. They'll tell you how it really works. Communication, information sharing, very, very important. All kinds of myths around information sharing. I mean, here we had John Petrola. He's an international expert on HIPAA. Just to get rid of the myths of what you can share and can't share. I mean, law enforcement is not a health entity. Law enforcement can share information. The provider in their jail can't without permission, but they can. So if somebody's at risk, they can share information. Boundary spanners, the providers know this pretty well. It's been around for a number of years. The special people, these are the case managers who actually know how to work both systems. They know how to work the criminal justice system. They know how to work the mental health and substance abuse systems. And champions, top down, bottom up. In some places it's the chief judge. In some places it's the public defender. And I can name those counties. You all know them. And sometimes it's bottoms up. Sometimes it's a provider. Sometimes it's a case manager that brings the whole thing together. So the other thing about it, and the key, is we create some kind of traction. That's just not a day and a half, but it's afterwards. A couple of other strategies: obviously a shared vision. Leadership usually does that, direction. Evidence-based practices. I'm going to go through a few of the evidence-based practices for you. I put them on here, kind of my little cheat sheet as we go through the map. And money, everybody talks about braiding funding and blending funding. Well, this is an opportunity where you can do it. At a minimum, you can do what we call complementary funding. We could do that. You put one next to the other and you make something work, okay? Obviously, data. Our data center collects an awful lot of this. We have permissions from all the state agencies to get this kind of data and then the outcomes. So, let's see. All right. Here's the way the criminal justice system works. You guys know this as well as I know it. You have 5 key points. Law enforcement, emergency services on the substance abuse mental health side, booking, initial court hearings, jails, courts, reentry, and community corrections and community support. Just before we go into that, the conversation sort of starts this way. We talk about the gaps in the current system without getting too negative, because believe me, you can get into a room and you can drag you down. If everybody says, we don't have enough money in the room, I try to actually reserve the money conversation until the end, which is really hard. But you talk about the gaps in the system, talk about what evidence-based practices are being. You look at the strength of the system, what's your providers like. Maybe you've got some really stellar providers that are doing a good job. We try to do a strength-based planning. So we look at what we actually have to work with in these counties. And then, of course, we talk about examples. And that's the facilitator's job, that we can bring up national examples, we can bring up state examples. They're doing such and such in Pinellas County, doing such and such in Miami-Dade. And we don't do that very well in Florida. We really don't share across counties what everybody's doing, okay? But that's part of our job, is try to do that. Hopefully the managing entities can do that. So here's a map. So this is what the map looks like as we start off. I hope it came out okay. It came out all right. But anyhow, you got community at both ends, because people are living in the community. They're living at home. They're going to return home, okay? So in the Intercept 1 is law enforcement and Baker Act and Marchman Act and CIT and all of the diversion activity. This is the biggest piece of the system, Intercept 1. I can guarantee you we go into any county and we'll probably spend 2 hours talking just about the front end. And not every county has the same resources. You've got some very well-oiled Baker Act systems in this state. You have some that are very poor. You have some addictions receiving facilities. Here in Sarasota County, the average wait time to go to the ARF, is Dave here, Dave Beasley? I don't know, Dave's here, but anyhow, First Step's here. But anyhow, I mean, it's less than 15 minutes. They're in and out. They drop people off at the addictions receiving facility and are gone. We have another county just north of us who has no secure addictions receiving facility. So they're winding up in jail by default. There is no other option, no other secure option. So as you go into a county, you look at all this, okay? And as many of you know, there's going to be another redesign, the Baker Act Marchman Act system. That's coming out soon. There's a lot of good stuff in there. And then there was a recent RFA that came out from DCF around central receiving facilities, which I know a number of counties have applied for. Excellent. $7.5 million this year, $10 million the next 2 years to do a central receiving facility. So that's all the front end activity. It's a lot more than that, actually, now that we have mental health first aid. But, you know, I really got to comment. But the other thing we have now is the Florida Sheriff's Association got $800,000 to do their CIT training this year, next year, and they're targeting the rural counties, which is probably one of the hardest things to do, is you got to take officers off the street for the training. I mean, it's very hard to do. So I'm going to tell you, as we stack up against other states, Florida, I know we think we're doom and gloom, but we actually have some very, very good alternatives. Many other states do not have freestanding CSUs. They do not have secure addictions receiving facilities. What they have are ERs. And believe me, the ERs do not want these folks, and we don't want folks going in the ER. So that's the front end of the system. The second is Intercept 2, which I'm going to go into detail on all these if I got time, is detention and initial appearance. All of these are points to divert people or to come up with a priority area for a new intervention if you don't already have one. So you've got an opportunity at booking, you've got an opportunity at the initial arrest, you've got an opportunity at the court appearance to look at the person, to look at whatever the sanctions are. The state's attorney, public defenders come up with agreements. They come up with, you guys know this better than I, okay? But I've seen the agreements. You can come up with, you look at a certain group of people. Then, of course, we got our jails and our courts. We have circuit courts. We have county courts. Even within a circuit, I can show you counties that have totally different systems, who have diversion systems in one county, don't have them in the next county, just south of us. And then you've got specialty courts, which I'll get into in a second. But anyhow, of course, then we have local jails and prisons. The bulk of the activity, to be quite honest with you, is really at the local jails. And a lot of the county grants, of course, they have a responsibility for the jail budget. It's their budget. It's not a DOC budget. So they're most concerned about the local diversion. And then we have Intercept 5, which is community supervision on probation and parole. Once again, alternative sanctioning programs are excellent. By the way, there's a lot of conversation this morning about violation of probation and technical. Nationally, the largest group of people who go from Intercept 5 back to Intercept 1 is that group of people. It's the technical violators. Now think about it. The person has a serious mental illness with a co-occurring substance use disorder, maybe some type of healthcare complexity. He doesn't or she doesn't keep their appointment. They don't show up to work, to court. They're driving without a license. That's the group that's winding back up in Intercept 1. 66% I saw today from DOC. Unbelievable statistic. So, for those of you who like circular views, there's a circular view. Okay? So, access to appropriate services right in the middle of all of this, okay? So, let's go quickly, okay? Intercept 1. I want to give you, this is my cheat sheet on the left-hand side. So, on the left-hand side, what we found to be effective, and by the way, we do have a lot more of this than some other states. I'll give you what we don't have later. So CIT has been huge. The challenge on CIT, there's really two challenges. CIT has been a long time. By the way, the very first CIT training, I don't know if you know this, 1996 in Hillsborough County, Sheriff Cal Henderson. And it was driven by the Skippers, a family who lost their son to a police shooting. They wanted to change the system. That was 1996 it's been around. Okay? And since then, of course, it's exploded. And what you have in Florida is you've got a lot of trained officers. The challenge is to do the crisis intervention teams. And I have personally called counties for friends and relatives. Do you have a CIT officer I can talk to? Proactive. I've actually done this proactively for a neighbor of mine. We saw something bubbling. It was in Hillsborough County. Called them proactively. The CIT team went out to the house. There was no crisis. They set it up in advance. If there was a crisis, call us first. They did. So, mobile crisis teams. We got a few in Florida, a couple hybrid teams where the provider is running the team. Specialized law enforcement training on a lot of different fronts. And then, of course, you got your central receiving facilities, both Baker Act, Marshman Act, and now the CRFs, soon to be. Orange County was fortunate where it had extra money years ago, so Orange County was able to do the central receiving facility for the forensic group. The transportation exception plan started in Hillsborough County many, many moons ago, and that was to allow law enforcement to take them to one place, one stop, okay? So, let's go to Intercept 2, once again. The booking. At booking, are we doing co-occurring assessments? Is it just substance abuse? Is it both mental health? The brief jail screening is an instrument out of the Gaines Center, very brief, 10 questions. Jail staff can do this. It's just a quick screen. And by the way, there's lots of other screenings out there now. Okay, the Gaines Center has a whole book written on screenings. Dr. Roger Peters from our department was the author of that. And there's all kinds of options now that weren't available 7 years ago. So then we've got mental health pretrial release. Pretrial release, varies from county to county. Jails and courts, once again, I put co-occurring in there again. You've got in the jail, you've got psychiatric services that may be available. Trauma-informed care has become it's everywhere across the system now. And then, of course, we now have mental health courts. We're going to do a quick inventory this week about where they are, what they look like. Each one of them has different capacity. They serve X number of people, but how much case management do they have when they leave? And that's a challenge for the courts. We're talking about co-occurring courts now. Obviously, veterans courts. The beauty of veterans courts is when a veteran walks in there and the veteran staff, they have access to all their medical records. They walk in with a computer. They got everything. Right at their fingertips. They can tell the judge what's going on. And of course, we've had drug courts for a number of years. And what the drug courts will tell you is, well, we're no longer a drug court anymore, we're a co-occurring court. We never realized it. We got all kinds of people with serious mental illness coming through our courts. So then you get all kinds of specialized dockets. So, but you also have an opportunity for diversion even there. Reentry, it's got 2 levels, one from prison system, one from the jail system. There is a very nice model called the APEC model. It's to assess, plan, identify, coordinate. This really refers to discharge planning. We worked with one county who got a reinvestment grant. What they did was good discharge planning. They never were doing any discharge planning before. They got permission to go into the jail. They went through the pods. They identified people. Then they did good planning. So forensic intensive case management teams, not as expensive as a full-blown assertive community treatment team. And then we have a forensic act team. I think we only got one in Florida. But the one that seems to have the most promise is the FICM, the Forensic Intensive Case Management Team, because it doesn't quite cost as much, okay? And it has and of course, we had the boundary spanners and the SOAR program. And many of you know about SOAR getting people on entitlements so they've got some kind of health care insurance. Most of the men don't have any health care. So, lastly, Intercept 5. Once again, specialized probation. I heard a little bit of that today. It is a national best practice where you lower the caseloads. And, of course, lowering, going from 100 to 60, we still got a ways to go, okay? And it's still a large caseload. I mean, if I had a caseload of 100, I wouldn't know everybody's name. So, but we have specialized probation officers who know mental illness, are trained in it. Once again, motivational interviewing is all over the system now, and I was glad to hear DOC using it too. So, now, this is what a map would look like in the end. This is a simplified one, okay? Because if you go into Miami-Dade and you go to a big county, you've got we actually have a new software package we're working on to put stuff behind these, okay? But this is the result of the people at the meeting. This isn't our work. So what the participants do is they identify each of the intercepts. We literally write in what's available. So let's just say Intercept 1. Intercept 1, they would identify every single hospital that's a Baker Act receiving facility. So now we got the hospitals involved, okay? They thought they were off the hook. Well, they're not. They're Baker Act receiving facilities, okay? Now, some of them are private, so they won't serve the public sector. We know that. Then we just move along, and of course, CIT, you probably can't see, is there. I'll never forget. By the way, I have a stack of newspaper articles from 1988 in Hillsborough County. And the headlines were, Sheriff's Department asked family members to intervene in the system. Wow, that tells you something. Of course, that was a time when Hillsborough County only had 17 CSU beds. It's a lot different in Hillsborough County these days. But I got a stack of those articles. We'll have to read them sometime. So anyway, as we go through the process, this is typically to take the mystery out of all this. You guys are in the room. You're the experts. You know how each one of these intercepts work. There are points of diversion. And then in the end, what happens is the committee basically picks their priorities. So this is pretty basic. Let's go back one. They'll pick a priority. And I will share with you what after doing 18 of these mappings, in Florida, we normally wind up, and I'm not going to say, when we go into Pinellas County, we may not find this. But the 3 biggies are typically the acute care system. That could be just beefing up the Baker Act system. It could be an addictions receiving facility. In the case of Hillsborough, they picked the central receiving facility, and they're bidding on that. So it was a year later, but, you know, there's hope. So typically we got the front end, to beef up the front end. The second one we always hear is the back end. It's supportive housing. It's interesting. I heard DOC talk about employment. Employment's important, yes. Housing is probably the #1 priority outside of this. We got people leaving the county jails. These are mostly people who are homeless. Many of them, I shouldn't say mostly. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for permanent housing, not transitional. Because shelters are just a Band-Aid. We know that. We know the homeless system so well that we know shelter. You can build a shelter, it's fine, it's good, it takes care of people, it gets them off the street. We know it well, but it is not the solution to homelessness. Only permanent housing is the solution to homelessness. You even see HUD. HUD is no longer funding transitional housing. HUD discovered after 26 years of housing first research, they realized what works. And if we're hitting 85% success rate on housing, so So housing is probably number 2 in the whole group. Number 3 is usually a process item. It doesn't cost a whole lot of money. We're not talking about a program. We're talking about just making the system work better. Sharing of information, discharge planning, those kinds of things. So when the committee walks away after a day and a half, what happens? Well, herein is the challenge. Oh, let's do mapping. Sounds like a good idea. Everybody else did it. Worked great in Miami. How about us? Well, this is the follow-up. This is your leadership. So what we do is the first thing is, when are you going to meet? Before we leave on the second day, when's the next meeting? Who's holding the meeting? We always got to have a community leader that's going to at least hold the next meeting. The ongoing work of the subcommittee. In some places, it is the Public Safety Coordinating Council. In other places, it's the delegated Criminal Justice Mental Health Committee. Depends on where you are. My only concern is there are some public safety coordinating councils that have so much on their plate that they may not pay enough attention to this. So that's just a kind of array of caution. And then obviously implementation, data, and outcomes. I'll tell you the success we're seeing. There's really 2 things we're seeing coming out of the mapping. A lot of communities are doing large-scale screening, large-scale, and other ones are doing discrete case management. They're doing the forensic intensive case management. So they're identifying the high utilizers in the system and just dealing with that group. So even if it's as small as 50 people, these are probably 50 of the most expensive people in the system. You know who they are. And if you don't know who they are, we can run the data. We can get the data run for you. So in any event, we recommend here is we recommend an action plan be updated every year. Not a full-blown mapping, but you got one person that's hawking that plan. Collier County does a nice job of that, by the way. They happen to have a consultant who looks at the strategic plan every single year, doesn't let anybody off the hook, and they're looking at that plan. Or do a remapping. That's sort of what we're finding lately. After about 5 years, leadership change. It might not be the state's attorney, it might not be the public defender, but it might be all the other middle managers are gone. It could be the director of the CSU. It could be whatever. So the remapping is a very, very valuable exercise. And I could name the counties, but we've done a couple of them, okay? So in any event, the last thing is you basically have access to our Technical Assistance Center, and I'll give you that resource in a second. On our TA Center, just like the other centers, the other states I mentioned. By the way, I just mentioned a couple of those states. We're doing a very comprehensive criminal justice, mental health, substance abuse Technical Assistance Center, everything from acute care to housing. Some of the others have just done specialty. State of Massachusetts has a center of excellence just on specialty courts. That's all they're focusing in on. The state of New York is doing a center of excellence just on CIT. That's it. So on our website, just so you know, we have a document library. We update it probably weekly. So it's there, and I'll give you that website in a second. And a couple of others, too. I try to keep it to four websites. That's enough. I mean, otherwise you'd be on the thing all day. So that's ours on the top. That's my contact information. You just want to shoot an email. The Gain Center, obviously, that's sort of the portal to the world. And then Policy Research Associates at Dr. Hank Stedman. And then the Justice Center, the Council of State Governments. Okay, so what's next? I can tell you there's 5 counties who are lined up for mapping this spring. I hope I can remember them all. But we got Pinellas, Duval for juveniles, Lee County, Lake County, Alachua is pending. Lake, I mentioned Lee, and Broward. And Broward called up. We did the Broward County on the adults a few months ago, and they want to do a mapping on juveniles. So they found it very valuable. They walked away and they said, you know, we got to take this to the next level. So I think I hit my time frame here. So that's sequential intercept mapping. Hopefully that takes the mystery out for you. It works. The feedback we've gotten from the counties is that it works. So I'll end on that note. Bernie? Okay. Any burning questions? Do we have any? Got one? Yes, sir. Well, and that's the Intercept one. And how you specifically, NA, can contribute, when the list of participants goes out to the counties, we tell the counties, they make their own selections. But we always say there has to be a person in recovery or 2 or 3 at that table. You have to be at the table, okay? The other thing is the front end, as I mentioned. The front end is the big discussion. How do we keep people out in the very beginning? Okay? Yep. Anybody else? Kumbaya.
Well, let's give Mark another hand.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, you now.